For this episode of Speaking of Suicide, I'm talking to Georgia. Georgia lost her brother, Callum, to suicide 6 years ago. Now, Georgia's training to be a paramedic and witnesses mental health struggles on a weekly, if not daily basis. I wanted to talk to her because I wanted to hear her perspective on mental health as both a grieving sister and someone who's now at the front line of trying to care for people who are struggling. I suspect that's going to prove to be a difficult balance. Speaking of Suicide is open and honest and at times pretty challenging to listen to. If you need to, please press pause and find some support. I'll give out the contact details for Mikeysline at the end of the episode, and you'll find all the links in the show notes. Georgia, let's talk about Callum. What was he like? Describe him for me.
So Callum was an extremely intelligent, wickedly smart, gregarious guy. He was really funny, he was really witty, he was really sporty, super handsome, and yeah, just really cool guy.
Your big brother.
Yes, so there's 4 years between us. I've got an older brother, Callum, and then an older sister called Camille.
And what was it like growing up together? Were you close?
Yeah, so growing up, I was typical youngest child, my sister typical middle child, and Callum and we did a lot of things together. He was just very boisterous and playful, and yeah, he was a great brother.
I had two big brothers, and my oldest is like 5 years older than me, and he was my total sort of hero. Mm-hmm. It just seemed to be a big enough gap to not feel like a rival, but to just admire him. And I thought of that because, as you described Callum, it was in such glowing terms that it reminded me of me thinking of my own big brother. Was he a bit of a hero to you?
Yes, I definitely looked up to him. He was quite coercive in some ways. He would get me to do things, and he was very encouraging. He was quite hard on me at times, but also when we were younger, we had a great relationship. But I think as we got older, like teenage years, we kind of clashed in things, like sharing a car and him taking food and I don't know, just kind of like typical things.
Were you ever aware of him having any mental health struggles, any problems with depression or anything else like that?
No, well, to be honest, he was really outgoing. He was really social. He loved skiing, mountain biking, climbing. He was the life and soul of the party. And he never really growing up had any signs of mental health issues, but I would say that in the later part of his life, he definitely had anxiety. I could just, you could just sense it. And he'd always have a shaky leg, and he was very sensitive in his own way. And he was really strong-willed, and he had a great sense of justice, right and wrong. His moral code was so strong that I guess sometimes he would get very passionate about things, and you could never win an argument with Callum because he was always right. He was so clever, and also he just stubborn. Even if the argument was over, he would just keep going, kind of thing. So, but he was sensitive, to other people's emotions.
If you're able to, can you take us back to when Callum ended his life? What was the context for that? What was the lead up to that? Had you any idea that this was coming, Georgia?
No. Literally never in my wildest dreams did I ever expect that Callum would do this. But leading up to it, he was in his final year of uni. He had completed his master's, and he was having a hard time in his relationship, him and his girlfriend at the time. broke up, this was a huge heartbreak for Callum. This was like the love of his life, and he had never really had that before. And so heartbreaks are really difficult. And I think as you get older, you learn to deal with things and the emotion and the pain. But for him, this was huge. And I guess it just affected him in a much larger way than we knew. And he was really sad. But, I was like, well, he's heartbroken. But no, he was in a really terrible place and I was not really aware.
How did you find out that he'd taken his life?
So I was at college that day, and I had been messaging him in the morning, and then it got to lunchtime. This is a bit like, I feel like this is a bit like spooky, kind of weird thing to say, but I just had this like really horrible gut instinct that something was wrong. And so I was meant to have an afternoon class, but there's just something in my body that felt like, oh, you need to go home. And so I did. So I started walking home and I felt really panicky, like really unsettled. And so I picked up the pace, found myself running. I never run. And I got home and I came to the house. The house was so quiet and the dogs were in the kitchen. And then there was like an entire pizza left on the counter. Untouched, cooked though. And I was like, oh. And then I walked back into the kitchen, I looked at the table. There's a little green post-it note. And he just wrote a really short sentence and an apology. So I ran upstairs, phoning him. I could hear his phone going off. And I opened his bedroom door and that's how I found him. So I ran next door to my neighbour, like our lifelong neighbour, just screaming for him to help. And I actually feel awful about that. I wasn't thinking at the time that I was going to put another person into that situation. But he is like my mum and dad's best friend, like lifelong neighbour. But I feel bad that I put that on him. I felt so helpless. I remember just feeling so helpless. I was like, there was nothing I could do. I was literally helpless. It was awful. I obviously called 999. And then I had to call my mum. But I knew he was dead. The paramedics came, obviously, but I wasn't even there when they arrived. I just went into shock. And yeah, that was it, really. And that was just like the catalyst for everything else that came. Like, honestly, when I think about it, I had memory loss for a really long time. And I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was smoking weed all the time. It was just... it was a really ugly time in my life. And then I just left the country. And I don't know if that was the right thing to do, but it felt like it. I was young. I was really young. I was like 22. So, yeah. I don't know Callum's state of mind or anything like that. But why weren't you thinking about us? Like, why weren't you thinking about me? What about my sister? What about me finding you? What about... Because some people call it selfish. Some people say that suicide is selfish. But it isn't selfish. You have to understand how much pain, how much extreme pain must you be in for that to be your only answer. That is... I can't even get on board with that. To put myself in my brother's head at that time, what anguish and suffering he must have been in for that to be his option is, I can't even fathom that. So unless you actually know, unless you experience that, you can't understand it. And like my mum and my dad and my sister, everybody kind of dealt with it in their own way. So for me, I mean, at the time I was studying, that came to an immediate halt. My exams were coming up. That stopped. My mum, how she dealt with it was she just went straight back into work. And my sister, she was working away at the time and she came home. But to be honest with you, and I don't like that I was like this, but I could not deal with seeing how it affected my mum and dad, and I just shut down. In terms of avoidance and like escapism and everything like that, my whole life literally changed overnight. I'm talking everything, like my education, my job, my outlook, and it was a bit of a blur for a while after it happened. And I didn't want my parents to see me suffering, because I was like, well, that made me feel worse. I didn't want them to see me suffering, but at the same time, I couldn't deal with seeing them suffering. And we all had a different experience, like it was me that found my brother. So obviously, visually, and it was a totally different aspect of grief. And I didn't deal with it very well. I dropped out of college, my job, I got a camper van, I left the country, I moved to Switzerland and just avoided it all.
You obviously didn't see this coming. You've made that really clear. You weren't expecting this at all. Was anyone in the family aware that Callum was struggling to this extent?
Yeah, my mum, she was concerned, and she, suggested, like, for him to get some help. And so the first port of call was my mum did get him a psychologist, kind of like a counselling thing. And that seemed positive because he went to the doctors, and I remember my mum saying, because she dropped him off at the doctors and he was in and out within like 3 minutes with antidepressants, and he was told, have you tried exercise? Obviously Callum was really sporty, so he exercised all the time. And then he was given a leaflet, and then he was told, we can put you on a waiting list for mental health support, but at the time they were saying like 18 months minimum. And so I think my mum was like, well, we can't have that. So she got him therapy herself. She was definitely more aware of what he was going through. However, I knew he was heartbroken, and I spoke to him, but I didn't think he would do this.
How difficult is that particular aspect of all this, that it was so unseen, such a completely out of left field shock? Is that a big part, do you think, of why you found it so very difficult?
Yeah, I guess so, because he was, I don't, even now, I don't understand it. It's like he literally had everything to live for. Like, really clever, good looking, loads of friends, just completed his master's degree, do you know what I mean? And I just can't get my head around, so reckless, so permanent. But then I think, oh, the pain was that bad. He was in so much pain that instantly he thought, can't deal with this, let's just end it. Let's make this stop. Let's just end it. And that's wild. And I always think, like he got up that morning and then he made himself lunch. He cooked himself a pizza. He'd come into the kitchen, obviously to eat his lunch, and something in his head thought, nah, like, just do it now. That's just really hard. And really, such a stupid thing to do.
A different situation, but in my past experience, I had something come very much out of left field, and a very shocking experience. And I found that after that, I almost didn't trust that something wasn't going to come out of left field again. I felt very much on edge. I felt that kind of, how can this happen? Anything could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered, in hearing your story, whether part of the legacy of this or the changes in you
Mm-hmm.
have been from, I wonder what the impact for you had been of having that profoundly shocking, unexplainable
Mm-hmm.
event happen to someone that you dearly loved.
Yeah, absolutely. So with what happened, it was my first real experience of grief. So, I'd never lost like a grandparent or a friend or a relative or anything like that ever. I had no experience of grief other than obviously your childhood pets and things. And it was awful. It was the anxiety as well that it's left me with. You think like, oh my God, like you start thinking about who you're going to lose next. And I really think actually, as a sister, I took Callum for granted, like big time. I had no idea how lucky I was. I never at any point in my life did I think you can kind of like, you're going to lose your mum or dad at some point and people are going to die. But you never ever think that you're going to lose your sibling, and you never think that you're going to lose a sibling like that. And I think the hardest part is, I think a lot of people could agree, is when you lose somebody to suicide, there's no peace there. There's no, oh, well, he died doing what he loved. Oh, at least he died happy, or it was an accident, or Callum died because he chose to. It was a choice. He ended his life. And that is a totally different kind of grief. And it's the worst. I have no peace. I can't even, it's awful. I think about it all the time, every day.
How long did it take you to get to the position of actually feeling life was precious? Was that part of the journey that you went on when you went away? And I presume processed all this. How did it work for you, Georgia?
No, it didn't come straight away. When it happened, I was reckless. I smoked weed all the time after it happened. I'm talking like all day, every day. I was really reckless. I dealt with it pretty badly in terms of my health, like a concern. I didn't have any like concerns for my health or like my life or me. That took a long time. And I think probably it took a few years for me to kind of get to where I am now, like I moved back home after COVID. I used to live in Switzerland, and I came back home because of everything that was going on in the country, and the borders were closing. And it was really through COVID where I had the time, and I think age as well, and like self-awareness, where I kind of, a switch flipped. You know, I was with my parents again. I was with my sister again. I've got nephews now. I've done a lot of things as well. Like I've done CBT, like counselling, like self-help books, like meditation, everything that I can to get to where I am now. But, you know, I'm 29 now, so yeah, I'm just a different person for sure. But it took me a long time to be better, for sure.
I'd like to move on and talk about your current career, or the career you're in the middle of just training for. Because, you know, it sounds to me like, obviously you're saying you've done a huge amount of work to deal with your feelings about Callum taking his life, but it's still obviously really painful for you. And now you've moved into a career as a paramedic.
Yeah.
When you first told me that, when we were talking before this, I thought, oh my goodness, surely you're going to be being faced by really difficult circumstances all the time. And I kind of almost wanted to reach through the phone and kind of worry about you. So tell me about the role you have now, and how much you're having to face people's mental health struggles.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm in my final year of uni. I'm training to be a paramedic. So, when I left school, you know, it was something I'd like to have done, but it wasn't at degree level at that time, and the option to kind of go down that route wasn't there for me. So I pursued something different. But it was only really after COVID, coming back home, I struggled to get a job in advertising and marketing. That's what I did before. And I really tried. I was like really struggled. Like nowhere was employing. I couldn't leave the country. It was awful. And I just kind of felt my brain rotting. So I saw that the paramedic course came to Aberdeen, and I thought, okay, well, I'll go for it. So I did a year of healthcare because I didn't have the relevant kind of science qualifications to apply for the degree. And to be honest with you, I was absolutely certain that I wouldn't get in because there was loads of applications, and I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And so I started applying for jobs. I actually got offered a job in Sweden. And then I got the offer come through, and I was shocked. So I thought, okay. So I went for it. And yeah, so I've been doing that for the past 3 years. I'm in my final year, and it's been interesting. It's been eye-opening. I mean, I had no idea really what to expect, but I've seen a lot of things. And in terms of it being difficult. I mean, I would say I'm a resilient person, but at the same time, I think I cope with it well because I don't think, and I hope that I will never go through anything worse or see anything worse than I have done. So I think, like, in situations regarding mental health, I'm actually okay with what I see and what I deal with.
One of the things that strikes me when I'm talking to people for this series is that, of course, a lot of our focus is on the fact that someone took their life and the circumstances of it. That one moment, and for you, you know, Callum choosing not to eat that pizza to write that note and go and take his life. But I'm sure there must be other ways you want to also remember him. You don't want him just to be remembered for that final act. So how do you hope you'll end up remembering him, even if you haven't quite got there yet? Because I know you said you think about all of this every day.
I struggle to talk about Callum in any setting. I struggle to... It's so hard. And I do like to remember him as, like, you know, this amazing guy, this clever, sporty, happy, super funny, all-rounder. Like, you know, he was in his own lane from day one, always. And that is how I remember him. But it just feels so tainted because he just robbed himself of an amazing life. Do you know, like, he has a family that loves him, his friends that love him. He would have had a great career. He's got nephews now, like my sister's wedding. I've passed him in age now, and if love could have saved Callum, it definitely would have, but it didn't. So I don't really know how I'd like to remember him. I really miss him. And I really miss him, and I'm just so sad that he's done what he's done. And I just wish he just didn't do it. Like, so impulsive. It's really awful. I really, really love him. I have no... You know how you asked me? Oh, like, how would you like to remember Callum? That's really hard for me to answer because I can't. I can't remember him in like fondly, or like bring him up and like talk about him fondly without it causing me absolute agonizing pain. Like, oh yeah, I call him like this, oh, like my brother this, my brother that. I can't do that.
Maybe it was a very insensitive question on my part.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't at all. I want to be able to do that about Callum, but I can't. I can't, like, openly talk about my brother in this, like, you know, happy way. I can't. I'm almost disappointed in him. And I'm really disappointed in myself. I've failed him as a sister, I think. I should have known more. I should have known him better. I should have really listened to him. I should have been more aware. I should have I should have appreciated him. I really should have, and I didn't. He was just my brother. He was just my big brother, and that was that. And I really, another thing I did is I've said some of the worst things ever to him when he was alive. I said some really horrible things, and I know it's like, oh, that's his brothers and that's his sisters, but I was a bitch to him sometimes. And yes, he could be really nasty to me, and I know that and things, but when you just look back at that and think, how could I ever have said that to somebody that I love? And and another thing, and that's me done, is losing Callum was the biggest life lesson I've ever had. Losing Callum instantly taught me to never speak to anybody that I love like that again. It taught me instantly to really think before I speak. It taught me the definition of you never know what you've got till it's gone. You cannot take words back. That's the thing. I can't apologise now. And it's completely altered my brain. I am a completely different person. And it took me losing my big brother to learn that. And if I hadn't lost Callum, who would I be now? Would I still be this ungrateful or this, I don't know, like, it really changed me for the better. Obviously, it's been horrific and the worst, but also it's made me a much better person because of what's happened, and I had to learn the hard way, big time. Really, really big life lesson there. And I want everyone to know that, actually. I want, when I hear my friends or when I hear people say, I hate my sister, I hate my brother, I hate my mum and dad, or they're speaking about their family in the most horrible way, they want nothing to do with them, I just think, oh my God, stop. Like, literally stop. It's so important that you forgive, that you forget, that you make amends, that you tell people that you love them, that you think before you speak. Because really it will have horrible consequences. I think that you should just really tell everybody in your life that you love them and show them. Big believer in that.
I know this has been really hard. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
I was talking to Georgia Bland. Shona McPherson has been listening to my conversation with Georgia. Shona, in many ways, I found it, it was a very difficult conversation to have, but there was so much in there and so much food for thought. What did you take away from it?
Yeah. What I took away was firstly being curious about what on that day led Callum to take his life. And Professor Rory O'Connor has a model which splits suicidality into 3 areas: the risk factors, the phase where we think about taking our life, and then taking action. And hearing the telling of Callum's story, maybe there were some personality risk factors, and then Georgia talks of the heartbreak that he had, and it's likely that then he was feeling very alone, although there was support and much love around for him. The tunnel vision that the suicidal mind gives us would have made it hard for him to feel hope. And he, rather was probably feeling defeated and stuck. And then moving from the ideas of suicide to taking action to things that, moderating factors that were around. One might have been impulsivity within Callum, and the other would have been access to the means. And as is always the case with suicide, there's no single cause, it's nobody's fault. One of the things that really sticks out for me in Georgia's compassionate account is her understanding of the suicidal mind. She says repeatedly that she knows Callum wasn't selfish, that he had no choice. In those moments, he couldn't see another way forward. And I also so appreciate this courageous woman's honesty in that, yes, she understands and has such compassion for him, and she's raging at him. And sadly, she blames herself. And I hope she also has parts that know it's not her fault. It never was. And finally, just, thinking of Georgia herself, the trauma, the loss, the impact that's had on her life story so far. And and the healing that she's finding, the career that she's choosing, and her truth that she has no peace. Very, very powerful, brave telling of the story. And if anybody listening to this feels in that place that Callum might have been in, with that sense of entrapment, that inability to ask for help, please turn and seek that help, because it is there for you.
Thanks, Shona. So don't forget, if you do need someone to talk to or some help, you can text Mikeysline on 07786 20 77 55, or contact them via Messenger, webchat or Twitter. And the number for WhatsApp is 01463 729 000. And all those details and links are in the show notes. Speaking of Suicide is funded by Mikeysline. This series in particular is being supported by McDonald's in the community, and the platform is sponsored by Highland-based family firm D&D Paving Limited. If you'd like to sponsor an episode or a series, do get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Speaking of Suicide is produced by Adventurous Audio Limited.